Hello, everyone, and welcome to the California Department of Education's Literacy Knowledge Building video series. In this video, Dr. Marianne Wolf from the University of California, Los Angeles Center for Dyslexia, Diverse Learners, and Social Justice will discuss important principles and cautions in reading remotely. She is the author of Proust and the Squid, The Story and Science of the Reading Brain, and most recently, Reader Come Home, The Reading Brain in a Digital World. She has received the highest honors from dyslexia organizations and most recently has been elected to the Pontifical Academy of Science. Before we begin, let's go over a brief bit of background on the Literacy Knowledge video series. This is a series of videos on critical topics in literacy, birth through grade 12. It was developed by the California Department of Education and literacy experts in the state literacy team, and it is complementary to the work of the Federal Comprehensive Literacy State Development Grants. You can learn more about the CLSD grants by going to the California Department of Education's website and searching for CLSD. The purpose of the video series is to provide guidance and resources on critical topics in literacy, to support the work of the CLSD grants, and to build coherence between California's literacy guidance documents, standards, and frameworks and how they all support literacy. A major objective of the CLSD grant is to bring coherence between California's guiding documents, some of which you see here, like the Preschool Learning Foundations, the Infant Toddler Learning and Development Foundations, the Practitioner's Guide for Educating English Learners with Disabilities, the Dyslexia Guidelines, and the English Learner Roadmap. Other content area standards and frameworks support literacy as well. The videos produced in this series will illustrate the connections between all of these documents and also explain how the documents themselves support literacy development for our students. Videos will be produced over the course of the CLSD grant period. To be informed when new videos are posted, join the CLSD listserv by sending a blank email to join-california-literacy-states-development-program at mlist.cde.ca.gov. And now I will turn it over to Dr. Marianne Wolf.
Hello again to all of you. I hope this is the third time we've been together, but it's certainly the third time I want to thank the California Department of Education and Jennifer Howarter and her team for putting all of this together. It's so important. And today's talk is one of the ones that have, in essence, such timely complexity. None of us ever thought we would have so much remote learning for our children. None of us wanted to have our children, in essence, living in environments where the screen was becoming their teacher instead of us. But we have had that reality, and there are lessons that I hope that we can use, not only for what has happened, but we can use in the future going forward. And so some of this research comes from my last book, Reader Come Home, The Reading Brain in a Digital World. And it also comes from researchers from around the world, the European eRead Network, a Canadian Multiliteracy Network. We're all trying to figure out what are the best ways of understanding both the advantages and the disadvantages of different mediums. If you remember my first talk with you from the UCLA Center for Dyslexia, Diverse Learners, and Social Justice, I use the expression that what we learn about dyslexia and the reading brain helps all children. Well, that same principle is behind the research that I'm going to be describing to you today, because our understanding of the reading brain has given us the realization that we who read on different mediums will be using different parts of our circuitry, and that the reading circuit will actually reflect the differences in the mediums. This is a really important, it's a difficult point. And for those of you who want to read more, that's why I wanted to mention my book. It's a really important, and I can't emphasize enough, that when we read in print, we are reading in a different way than when we are reading on a screen. And there are many factors that are involved. But I want to begin by saying that even though we're going to be talking about differences, we're not talking about this is a binary. You only use the one and not the other. This is a moment in which we are, if you will, in a hinge, in communicative capacities. We are moving just as our ancestors did thousands of years ago from an oral culture to a literate culture. We're moving from a print culture to a digital one. And I don't want it ever thought about in terms of one is traditional, one is innovative. No, what we have to realize is there are different advantages to each. And that's what today's talk is really going to be about. Now, my colleague Sherry Turkle has written a great deal about this. And one of the things that most memorably she said was that we transgress not because we try to build the new, but because we do not allow ourselves to consider what it disrupts or diminishes. And that's going to be a lot of what I talk about with you. What is being disrupted? What is being diminished when our children are forced to be learning on screens for so much of their time? And can that information help us in the future with reading on the screen and with reading over time, developmentally? Can we do better with this knowledge? Now, the next slide gives you a colleague of mine, Patricia Greenfield's, some of her research done like my early research 10 years ago, and now is being updated and changed with our new environments. But what she said 10 years ago or 11 years ago is absolutely the case today. Every medium has its costs and weaknesses. Every medium develops some cognitive skills at the expense of others. Internet, digital may develop impressive visual intelligence. Absolutely. Democratization of knowledge. But the cost seems to be deep processing, mindful knowledge acquisition, inductive analysis, critical thinking, imagination, and reflection. Now, I want to combine this with my first talk with you on the science of reading, when I discussed deep reading. What Patricia Greenfield is saying there is the worry that I have had also for the last decade. And that is that the deep reading skills, induction, knowledge, and making analogies between what we know and what we are learning, our ability to infer, our ability to have empathy, to take on the perspective of others. Very, very importantly, our ability to make critical analytic judgments of what we read. That requires time. So the real issue with mediums is, are we able to do deep reading with the digital screen, or are the characteristics and affordances of the digital medium actually disadvantaging the time-consuming, more sophisticated deep reading processes? That's going to be the real question that we will not be able to answer today, but that we must approach as a society. Now, the evidence that I want to show you is the evidence that has made me, if you will, most concerned about what the ultimate effects of digital learning is on our children. Now, as everyone knows, we have, if you enter almost any environment with little ones, they have an iPad. Now, sometimes that iPad is just being used as a babysitter. But the reality is that those children who are being, if you will, overstimulated by all these bells and whistles, in terms of language development, by the time they are 2, the ones who have had all the bells and whistles are actually less developed in their language than those who are with us, the adults. Now, there's a lot of work by pediatricians like Barry Zuckerman, Jennifer Radesky, et cetera, who are asking us to very seriously examine how we are using these devices, especially under 2, even more so under 1.5. So there are various pediatric guidelines that are really asking us to be very gradual in the use of these devices, but that the research on language is indicating that this is not something that is giving us more language, but in fact, less than caretakers. Similarly, pediatric neurologist John Hutton has shown that when we give the same story to a child auditorily or bells and whistles on an iPad with all the visual elements of that story versus a parent reading that same story to a child, clear advantages for adult-child interaction in terms of language regions being activated. He calls this the Goldilocks effect, where the parent is best, then audio, and then the video version. Same story. Why? It's because of the attention, the focusing of attention, the elaboration of language that can happen. Now, that does not mean that there can't be wonderful apps that I think of Tinkerbooks by my colleague Cynthia Brazil at MIT, in which there are intentional parent-child interactions that are being done with a screen. Again, no binaries, but in my ideal world, it's very gradual in that 0 to 5 period. Now, my colleagues in the eRead network in Europe have performed the largest meta-analysis on young adults on this topic. And like what Hutton did, they did the same story, but one version was on digital on the screen and one was in print. Now, they've studied this paradigm over the last 20 years, from the year 2000 till the end of 2017. And what they asked were questions about comprehension, sequencing of information, et cetera. And the clear superiority is for print for comprehension. Now, some of you rightly will say, well, what about the kids who are real digital natives, the ones in just the last years of the study? They rightly asked that same question and found that those kids, the young adults, who are most close to what we would call a pure digital native, actually did even better in comprehension on print than the years before. Why? Again, qualitative analysis by Rockefet Ackerman. This study was by Delgado and this whole group, Salmeron in Barcelona. The children grow up to be these young adults all this time on the screen, and by this point, they think they're so much faster reading on the screen that makes them better. So when asked, they said, oh, of course we're better on the screen. They were shocked to find out they were better on print, because they say, well, we're faster on the screen. Again, go back to deep reading. Deep reading processes are timed. They require time of us. And when you are basically skimming, which is the case with so many of us, when you are skimming, you are often using an F or a Z pattern when you read, skipping important details, potentially just browsing the information. And even though we are all very good at that, that's how we do our emails. And I don't want you to deep read your emails. I want you to realize, however, that when when things are important, we are basically skimming them. That gives us less time for real concentration and sustained attention, which has implications for memory. It also has implications for our ability to be immersed in reading. And this is one of the most important aspects. This is the reading life. This is the sanctuary that we possess, that we may all of us. If you read Read or Come Home, you will see in my letter 4 that I experienced the same things that everybody else. I had to retrain myself. This is a really important aspect that we don't even realize, because it's all milliseconds. We don't realize what we are skipping in our circuit when we're skimming. And the ability to remember is not the same as well. Now, the reality is that it's not just the screen itself. There are issues with the screen, but it's that the screen is part of an environment, a landscape of distraction. Our children are going from one medium to the next, sometimes 27 times per hour, they're switching attention. The switching of attention, what Linda Stone has called the continuous partial attention of our young. This is anathema for true sustained attention that leads to memory, that leads to the deep reading skills that we want. So what does this mean for us as a society? What does it mean in a time of COVID when we are forced to be on the screen? It means that we have to pay extra special attention, whether we're teaching our children through a screen or whether we're on a screen as I am 10 to 12 hours a day. We must be vigilant about how we deploy these deep reading skills, because if we really are skimming everything, we will be reducing the time for critical analysis. That leads us to be more susceptible to fake news, to false hopes, false fears, demagoguery. It's a recipe for not being empathic or making real judgment on the discerning of truth. It also makes us less able to grasp complexity. At another level, which is dear to my heart as an old literature major, it gives us less chance to really perceive beauty. David Brooks wrote a column in which he said, he doesn't know when it happened, but he looked up and beauty has vanished. I think part of that vanishing act is because we're skimming so much, we're not giving the time to evaluate the truth, to appreciate beauty, to take on other perspectives. All of this is a threat to a democratic society that needs our perspective taking, that needs our critical analysis, and that needs our empathy. So here I've been talking about all this negative aspects. I do not want to end on a negative note. Most of us are forced to be using digital platforms, and some of us have no other choice. I've been working for many years with a project called Curious Learning, a global literacy project, in which we have children who have no chance of learning to read without an iPad or a platform of some sort that's digital. In that case, the democratization of knowledge could not happen without our digital world. There are so many advantages to our ability because of the digital world. So in terms of the democratization of knowledge, I don't believe anything has been more important. The personalization of knowledge, and that's going to be our AI future, which I think has many, many beautiful possibilities when done right. But what about now? What about now when so many of our children are on screen? Well, there are two very important, great uses of it. And this is why I mean, there's no binaries here. We are forced to be using the screen, but we can use it for the best, its best advantages, and things like practice. One of the hardest parts of my work as a reading scholar is to help people understand that old-fashioned concept of kill and drill or drill and kill is ridiculous. The brain needs multiple exposures to learn. And here's where digital learning can be of great help in giving practice for our children and giving our children who are from SES backgrounds that are not giving them a rich language environment, it can increase their conceptual knowledge when done right. Now, we live in an age of inequities. So even when I look at the advantages of the digital world, there can be inequities that we must address. And you know, that's another issue that isn't for today. But I want to insist that there are really good aspects that we can use for our benefit and for our children's benefit, whether we're talking about global literacy initiatives, which are so important, or the work in our own classrooms that are online now. There are beautiful ways of using practice and conceptual knowledge building. So I have, in the end of my last book, decided that the most important thing for me to prove to others that I'm not talking about binaries is to say, well, what would my ideal brain be? My ideal deep reading brain. And it would be one that preserves deep reading as it expands and uses these digital skills that our children must have. And so I have been developing a concept called a biliterate brain, in which we are trying to work so that children largely have print the first 10 years and learn to read and learn deep reading on those print-based mediums, as well as learning parallel, so it sounds like Vygotsky, but it is a lot like Vygotsky, a parallel process of learning coding and programming on digital platforms, so that we're never not learning digitally, but we're never just learning to read with digital. That the more we can introduce our reading brain through print, I believe the better that those early deep reading skills will develop. And then when that child is proficient in automatic, 10 to 12, then we have teachers prepared to teach deep reading and digital wisdom at the same time, so that ultimately deep reading can be something across mediums for those biliterate brains. Between then and now, I ask all of us to realize that we have to be vigilant. We don't have that biliterate brain yet, but we can be working towards it. And one of the ways that we work towards it is to be vigilant ourselves and to ask the question, what is the purpose of our reading, whatever it is? If it's really like a more superficial, if you will, not that all my email is superficial, but by and large, I will never deep read my superficial things. And I will take an iPad the next time I'm ever on a plane. God knows when that's going to happen. But I have a reason to read on the iPad like everybody else. But in my briefcase and in your metaphorical briefcase, anything that's important, I print out. I'm careful. I ensure that I am really inoculating myself against false information by giving time for critical analysis, time for discernment. And if there's anything that's going to be an antidote to our inequality, it is to teach deep reading skills to all our children so they are empathic, critical, analytic, and ultimately reflective citizens of our country. And so I end this talk with you with a philosopher, Martha Nussbaum. And she said something that rings so true to me that I want to end with. It would be catastrophic to become a nation of technically competent people who've lost the ability to think critically, to examine themselves, and to respect the humanity and diversity of others. And unless we support these endeavors, the kinds that I'm talking about with you, it is in such a nation that we may well live. It is therefore urgent now to support curricular efforts, that's us, aimed at producing citizens who can take charge of their own reasoning, who can see the different and foreign, not as a threat to be resisted, but as an invitation to expand their own minds and capacity for citizenship. I ask you to examine the purposes of your reading and to ensure that our next generation is fully endowed with the capacity to read deep reading across mediums. And for that, I wish you all the best in your work. I am so grateful to you. Godspeed in all your efforts. Last slide is to thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you for viewing Important Principles and Cautions in Reading Remotely. Make sure to watch the other videos in the series, which you can access by going to the CDE website and searching for CLSD. Thank you.